So a new survey just came out titled How Canadians Really Feel About Various Housing Policies. And I wanted to unpack it a little bit in this video because I think it's something that doesn't get a lot of discussion. And it's something that we really need to consider as a community when our government is introducing certain housing policies. There's definitely no surprise that we are in a housing shortage. I've talked about it so many times on this channel, in fact. More importantly, though, it's what strategies are in place to help alleviate that housing strategy over the next 5, 10, 15, even 20 years as we bring in record amounts of immigrants into this country. So let's dive into this. The first one on here says that roughly 3 in 5 Canadians support decreasing the number of immigrants coming into the country until housing becomes more affordable, according to the new national survey. For a little bit of backstory, the federal government basically plans to welcome about 500,000 new immigrants into the country this year, next year, and the following year for a total of almost 1.5 million people. This is to help address things like labor shortages, counterbalance the country's aging demographic, lots of stuff like that. But a lot of people, and fairly enough, are kind of wondering if this is really the solution when we're in the middle of a housing crisis. According to the poll results, 3 in 5 Canadians support or somewhat support decreasing the number of immigrants coming into Canada until there is more affordable housing. Of all the provinces, the prairies are in the highest support at 65%, and BC is in the lowest support of this at 52%, but that's still the majority. It seemingly makes sense, though, if you're in the middle of a housing shortage and you're bringing in so many people into the country, where do you expect those people to sleep? Regardless of whether they decide to buy or rent, housing is something that they need, so they need to go somewhere. So it doesn't really surprise me that 3 in 5 feel like that. I'm actually surprised it's not higher than that. And that'll be something really interesting to see how the government really decides to address. That's a lot of homes that need to be built very, very quickly. So this one doesn't necessarily surprise me. Now, the next question that they had asked is how most Canadians feel about building on land that's set aside as a green space. Now, if you're from British Columbia, you know we have something in BC called the Agricultural Land Reserve. This is really no different than the green belt that has been in the news lately in Ontario. It goes on to say that survey participants were also asked how they felt about this and setting aside, or planning to build rather, housing on land that is set aside for green space. And the poll results revealed that 64% of Canadians are opposed to building new housing properties on green spaces, while 18% they are somewhat opposed to this. It's probably really important to understand why that land is set aside in the first place. And I can't necessarily speak to the Greenbelt in Ontario, but I can speak to the Agricultural Land Reserve in British Columbia. Especially with the lower mainland, we're fairly landlocked. We're landlocked in terms of when you go further north, you've got mountains. When you go to the west, you've got the ocean. And when you go south, you've got a border. There's only one direction you can really go in British Columbia, and that is east. In the lower mainland anyway, until you start hitting mountains. So the reason the Agricultural Land Reserve was really created was to make sure that we didn't run out of space to farm, to provide food and supplies, agriculturally anyway, that we need as a province to survive and thrive. Every time some of that land gets pulled out of the Agricultural Land Reserve and used for any other purposes rather than what it was really intended for, that just really puts restraint on the future of British Columbia to be able to feed the people that live here. And it's not just feeding people that's important. There's also lots of other things that happen on this land for agricultural purposes. So while in this survey, obviously a lot of people think it's important to protect that space. And I'm wondering if the people that maybe didn't want to protect it maybe don't quite understand why it was set aside in the first place. Now, the next one that was asked to Canadians is how they felt about tax incentives, and more specifically, tax incentives to build rental property. When asked how they felt about governments giving tax incentives to private developers to build new rental units, 20% said that they are in support, while 35% said they somewhat support this. The support is highest in British Columbia at 61%, 60% in Quebec, and among older Canadians aged 55 or older at 55%. This one I found a little confusing. I'm not quite sure why it would be a bad thing to provide incentives to build rental homes. The important piece that I really see in all of that is that those rental homes remain affordable. You just can't put them to market and not have an affordable contingency kind of attached to them where they just become part of the overall rental market. But even if that was to happen, to be honest, adding more rental stock to the market is never going to be a bad thing. And especially in a time where we have such ultra high rental rates, this is something that's really needed for the marketplace, especially in British Columbia. So this is a report that was published on CTV's website and done by the research company Nanos. This covered on some of the more national type stuff that we hear, but there's definitely some local stuff as well that's going on. And if you're not familiar with some of the things that have been proposed in British Columbia, I definitely think you should watch the YouTube video that I did on this. It's called 5 Reasons That We Will All Regret, BC's Homes for People announcement. Now, whether you agree with some of the things that were announced or not, the biggest one that had me of pretty dire concern is the ability to add up to 4 residences on a single family lot, which is seemingly still being fleshed out by the government. I'm kind of thinking we'll probably hear a little bit more about this in the upcoming fall budget when it's released. But if you want to educate yourself a little bit on what was announced previously, check out that video because it's going to be a really good resource for you. And that's basically it for today's video. So I've linked the article below in the description. But please don't forget to comment. Let me know what you think about what was discussed in this video or even in the video about what's happening locally here in British Columbia. I'm always interested in what you guys think and how you feel these policies might affect housing in the area. Of course, don't forget while you're down there in the description as well, if you're interested in taking us up on our free BC home buyers course, which we are still offering at a highly discounted price of nothing as of right now, there's a link below where you can check that out, where you can get over 3 hours of course content with yours truly. Hey, thanks for watching this video. Thanks for subscribing, and we'll look forward to seeing you on the next one. Cheers.